Today, we're diving into something that is, and I'm not exaggerating, the absolute bedrock of any successful project, the Business Requirements Document, or BRD Capture. The best way to think about it, it's the map, the essential map you draw before you ever take a single step on a long and complicated journey.
So, let me ask you a question. Have you ever been part of a project that just felt lost? You know what I'm talking about. The meetings seem to go in circles, the features are constantly changing, and it feels like nobody can agree on where you're actually supposed to be going. It's incredibly frustrating, and honestly, it's way too common.
And this is really the difference it makes. When you don't have that map, you get chaos. You get confusion, you get that dreaded scope creep, which just burns through time and money. But with a map, with a solid BRD, you get clarity, you get direction. You get a project that actually stays on time, on budget, and most importantly, solves the right problem. The difference is, quite literally, night and day.
Okay, so what is BRD Capture, officially? Well, it's the process of getting all your key stakeholders in a room and actually gathering and, crucially, documenting what the business needs. The source material nails it with this analogy. It's the most important initial step, just like drawing that map before you start your journey. It sets the destination.
So why do we even bother with this? Well, it all boils down to three huge objectives. First, you have to make sure you're solving the right problem, not just chasing symptoms. Second, you're building a fence to prevent scope creep, that silent project killer that can derail everything. And third, you're creating a solid foundation, something the technical team can look at and say, okay, we get it, we can build this, and we can estimate it accurately. If you nail these three things, you are already way ahead of the game.
All right, let's break this process down into stages. We're going to start with stage 1, the concept. Think of this as drawing the very first rough sketch of our map. We're just trying to get the general shape of the land before we start adding in all the little details.
Now, this stage is all about getting your own house in order before you get bogged down in details with the client. The product owner has some serious homework here. They need to define who the stakeholders are, research similar products, and maybe even sketch out some sample user journeys. The key here isn't to write the final document, not even close. The real goal is to get the internal team on the same page, and this is so important, to log all of your assumptions. Writing down what you think is true is absolutely vital because it brings misunderstandings to the surface right away.
But you got to be careful, because this is where huge mistakes can creep in early. If you don't really, truly understand the core business goal, scope creep starts on day one. If you show up to a client meeting with no reference material, they're not going to be able to picture what you're talking about. And if you don't log those assumptions, you can bet that different people on your team will walk out of the same meeting with completely different ideas about what you're building.
Okay, so now let's move on to stage 2, the high level. We've got our initial sketch. Now it's time to turn that into a proper blueprint.
So in this stage, the product owner's job shifts. They go from doing internal prep work to actively facilitating client meetings. You're in there, you're documenting the high-level functional requirements, but one of the key deliverables here isn't just a list of what's in scope, it's also defining what's out of scope. You're identifying the gaps. And here's the critical part. Every single gap you find needs to have an owner and a deadline to figure it out. That's how you stop uncertainty from just hanging around forever.
The pitfalls here are a little more subtle, but they are just as dangerous. If you write your BRD in a way that's super technical or confusing, your business stakeholders won't be able to tell you if you got it right. If you skip that gap analysis, don't worry, that scope will find its way back into the project later when it's much more expensive to deal with. And a simple one that's so easy to miss, please always send a meeting recap. It prevents so many arguments down the line about who said what.
And that brings us to the final phase of making our map. Stage 3, the details. This is where we add all the fine print, every little symbol, every label, leaving absolutely zero room for guessing.
This stage is all about being precise. The PO is now deep in the weeds, documenting every single business rule, every data field, every error message, every weird edge case. But it's not enough to just write it all down. You have to be constantly validating these details with both the business stakeholders and your development team. The standards here are super strict. The document needs version control, and every single use case has to be reviewed and signed off on. No exceptions.
And the mistakes you can make here can completely wreck all the great work you've done so far. No version control? Your team could spend weeks building from an old document.
Vague requirements? Your quality assurance team has no idea how to test anything properly. And this is a huge one. If your beautiful, detailed BRD isn't actually traced to the work tickets in your backlog, you're guaranteed to miss requirements. It's that simple. So, let's just pull this all together for a second. What's the real value of going through this whole meticulous process? Well, it's pretty simple. It's about creating that well-drawn map.
It really does all come back to this one powerful idea from the source material. Everything we've talked about, the stages, the pitfalls, all of it, it's all in service of this one single concept. I mean, you would never set off on a cross-country road trip without a map, right? So why on earth would you start a massive, expensive project without one?
Look, in the end, the BRD isn't just some piece of paperwork you have to do to check a box. It's the thing that creates alignment. It becomes the team's single source of truth. When someone asks, hey, why are we building this feature? Or, how is this button supposed to work? The answer is never, well, I think. It's, let's check the BRD. That right there is the foundation of a real shared understanding.
By mastering this process, you're not just creating a document, you are setting your entire team up for a successful journey. You're giving them the confidence that only comes from knowing exactly where you're going and exactly how you plan to get there. So now that your map is drawn, the only question is, are you ready for the journey?